Moscow.
That's the Kremlin. And that's the university.
Why does the West have such a negative attitude towards you?
It's fear.
Fear of what?
Of Russia, our size, our nuclear weapons, our abilities in lots of other areas. But that's an old mindset.
The West has an ultimate demand. Be like the West. Accept the rules of the West.
No, I have to be the way my people expect me to be.
At the moment, the people have widely different expectations, and some no longer expect anything at all of Vladimir Putin. Siberia, a 5-hour flight from Moscow. It's minus 37 degrees. Conflicts are still solved in the traditional manner here. The closest small town is an hour away by helicopter. Vladimir Putin has taken the weekend off. No meetings, no demonstrators, no noisy demands to get off the political stage, to retire. Vladimir Putin and his friend Sergei Shoigu, whose day job is Minister of Emergencies, want to go stalking deer together. Final preparations for the hunt. The fact that his name is now associated with all things bad in Russia has hit him hard. It's personal. It's an attack on a life plan, on his past. Although in public he's gone on the attack, calling the demonstrations in Russia the most natural thing in the world, hardly anyone believes him. And the opposition definitely doesn't. As a result, the weekend hunting party is small. Only men, some friends, bodyguards. Quiet, detachment, loyalty. That's what he wants here. Vladimir Putin doesn't think he's to blame for anything, at least not on the record. Putin has a law degree.
I could have changed the constitution and tailored it to my needs. Many asked me to do that. I refused. I think there are fundamental values that the country should get used to.
Arrival at the party conference, which nominated Vladimir Putin to run for president for the 3rd time. Some will vote, the others will clap. This coronation service has been scripted down to the last detail. The outgoing president, Dmitry Medvedev, waits with his successor, who's also his predecessor, for the signal to come on stage.
Президент Российской Федерации Дмитрий Анатольевич Медведев. Председатель правительства
Even though the announcer names Medvedev first, the shouts are for Russia and Putin. The West has been banking on a second term for Dmitry Medvedev.
If someone from the West bangs on individual politicians in Russia, that's a huge mistake. You shouldn't bank on one person. You should bank on the whole Russian people.
Nothing here is left to chance. There's the much-decorated general who only knows one candidate.
Dear friends, I ask you to support the candidature of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin at the presidential elections for the Russian Federation.
Then the dynamic young entrepreneur with the same request. And finally the woman and mother from the people. It's also Mother's Day in Russia today.
I support the candidacy of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin for President of Russia because we mothers with lots of children and we mothers of adoptive families are putting our hope in him.
Finally, the once and future hope of the party shows why he, not Medvedev, is the man of the hour.
If the people call out Russia and Medvedev and Putin, then that's good. But when they call out Russia, then everyone should be heard. So again, please.
Journalists are only allowed to follow the show from outside the hall as a live broadcast on screen, a kind of Russian real-time. Inside, the national television station needs all the space for the nationwide broadcast, and journalists would only get in the way. The party will confirm the candidate with exactly 100% of the votes.
Of course, our political enemies are very critical because of the freedom of the press and things like that. But they can do that. They're allowed to speak out publicly and very actively. They can demonstrate. The media work completely normally and aren't interfered with. That confirms that our society has positioned itself in such a manner that it won't go back to the past.
With the qualification that so far no other party has been allowed to announce and celebrate the announcement of its candidate live and nationwide on the state television channel. Nobody, not even the opposition, doubts that Vladimir Putin will win, even though weeks later, in March 2012, they won't recognize his official share of the vote, namely 63%. But the competition is beaten. Vladimir Putin is back in the Kremlin. It's business as usual in Moscow. Those with money and connections are in the Bolshoi Theater tonight. The Cathedral of Cultured Society is opening its doors again after a refurbishment lasting 6 years. It's the event in the social calendar. cultural events like that aren't really his thing. He's more into ice hockey. And because he was himself never really much good at pushing the puck around, he occasionally spends hours training alone in an empty suburban hall. Distancing himself from the nouveau riche and from his predecessor is beneficial for his presidential campaign. Ice hockey is a sport with a mass following in Russia. The 2014 Winter Olympics will be held in Sochi. Vladimir Putin will be 62. As president, he could open the games by skating across the glittering ice. It would be useful to be confident on his skates. That's what he's training for, and he'll do it for hours if need be. St. Petersburg, Russia's most important city after Moscow. Vladimir Putin grew up here in the 50s and 60s. At the time, the city was still called Leningrad. He never saw his two elder brothers. They both died as children, long before he was born.
I spent most of my time outside with the other boys. They were all like me. There were no oligarchies or party functionaries. They all lived elsewhere. The girls and boys who lived around us came from working-class families. Our lives were lived in the courtyard from morning till night, sometimes late at night. Then the parents came home and called us in. In the communal flat, we had a room of 24 or 25 square meters, in which I lived with my parents. Then there was a family with 3 people, and another one with 2 people.
Hardly any other city suffered as much during World War II. For 871 days, German troops besieged St. Petersburg, preventing its inhabitants from getting new supplies. Hundreds of thousands died. Putin's father was seriously wounded as a soldier. The parents survived and dealt with the trauma mostly on their own.
I can't say we were a very emotional family. We didn't talk to each other a lot. We all lived our own lives. We did get on well, and my parents stayed together their whole lives. Nevertheless, there weren't a lot of emotional issues, or heroic deeds, or great difficulties, or tragedies. They didn't like to talk about that sort of thing.
His father was a real working man. He was always ticking Vladimir off about something. Of course, he loved his son, but he was scared of coming across as too lax. His mother was benevolence personified. She was always at pains to avoid conflicts. No quarrels, that was the main thing. His father was very different. Working class, simply.
Putin's judo club meets in the gym. He trained here as a teenager. Being able to stand up for himself and asserting himself is something that has occupied the not exactly muscular Vladimir Putin ever since childhood.
How did I get into sports? In the beginning, we were all the same. At 5, 6, 7, 8. We ran around the courtyard. When we were older, 13 or 14, things changed. We all developed differently. Some grew taller and stronger and were more healthy. They became physically superior. Simply your personality wasn't enough anymore to remain the natural leader. I needed tools in order to maintain my position in the pack. Give your best for victory and the result. Get the experience you need so you know how to act in such situations. That's important. It's character forming. Sports play an important role in that area. You have to be able to mobilize yourself to focus completely on achieving a certain goal. And that's what you learn from sports.
The White House in Moscow is the seat of the Prime Minister, arrival for the cabinet meeting. Vladimir Putin generally only shows up when his team have taken their places. They know that. Anti-authoritarian child-rearing wasn't an educational concept in Soviet days, and things hadn't changed much in modern Russia. Teachers stand at the front and lecture. Since the time of the Tsars, there have been clearly defined roles. Teachers are teachers, pupils are pupils. But to the annoyance of his advisors, teacher Vladimir Putin isn't a fan of hire and fire. He's very loyal to those he's chosen, so even unpopular ministers stand good chances of surviving. Putin's strength lies in being able to moderate between the interests of the various power centers.
Our cabinet consists of two factions. The one faction wants the state to have more influence over the economy, with more regulation and state investments. The other faction, the more liberal wing, is in favor of traditional market models and private enterprise. This faction wants the government to create transparent rules.
Adhering to rules and being respected as an equal player, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's been the aim of Vladimir Putin ever since the start of his political career. Even in 2001, when the new president spoke in the German parliament, there was a sense of disappointment that the West, after an initial euphoria for the new Russia, was banking on old recipes.
Today, decisions are made without us sometimes. We're then just asked to support them. It's often said that without Russia, it would be impossible to implement these decisions. We want to know, is that normal? Is that a real partnership? We haven't learned to trust each other yet. Despite all the sweet talking, we secretly continue to resist. Sometimes we demand loyalty to NATO. Sometimes we argue about the purpose of its expansion. We still can't agree on the problems with the missile defense system. There are lots of things like that.
Since NATO has been setting up missiles close to the Russian border, Russia has been making a show of strength and rearming. NATO's argument for the missile shield is that it's not against Russia, but against Iran.
You make me laugh. God bless you. That feels good at the end of the working day. I'll go home in a good mood now. Why are we worried? These radar systems and the defensive systems cover our territory all the way to the Ural region. They neutralize some of our land-based nuclear weapons, which is the foundation of our defensive potential. All the experts know this. Then you come along and say, don't worry, we're building this, but we're not going to use it against you. We're the good guys. Look into our honest eyes. Well, that's not how it works. And that's why I laughed.
Question to President Bush: is this a man that Americans can trust?
I'll answer the question. I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. Good job, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I think he is a decent and sensitive human being. But he was President of the United States and he had to fulfill his duty. He did what he thought was right, as the team of experts around him thought was right. Even so, I think many of his decisions were mistaken.
Moscow is celebrating the victory over Nazi Germany. The idea that Russia could fall apart even more after the fall of the Soviet Union is Putin's nightmare. The possibility that Chechnya and other constituent republics might turn away from Russia, slowly causing the biggest country in the world to become insignificant, is beyond his imagination. To maintain Russia's size, he's willing to go to war, willing to accept the deaths of thousands of civilians, but also of many Russian soldiers.
It was a high price, a very high price. You remember something like that forever. But I'm certain that if we hadn't taken a tough stance at the time, we would have demonstrated weakness. The consequences would have been dreadful and the number of victims very much higher. Russia would have been sucked into a never-ending series of bloody local wars. We would have had a second Yugoslavia.
You're not a natural diplomat?
Not at all.
Fragmentation bombs are used, killing hundreds of people. Given this Don't you think that by trying to eradicate terrorism in Chechnya, you are going to eradicate the civilian population of Chechnya?
Do you want to become a radical Islamist and have yourself circumcised? I'll invite you to Moscow. We're a multi-faith society and have good experts. I'll instruct someone to circumcise you in such a way that nothing grows back. I studied here. This is Leningrad University, now the University of St. Petersburg. I used to work in this building.
The worker's son dreamed of working for the Foreign Intelligence Service from an early age. He wanted to be part of the mysterious elite, wanted to travel to other countries for his people, his country. That's why he studied law.
I knew that the people who worked in intelligence or counterintelligence had to be selfless, as we used to say. They were willing to risk everything in order to achieve the big ideals, even if that meant giving their lives. That was my primary motivation.
I said, I'm a musician. I play the cello and make music and know this field. What do you do in your job? I can imagine you ensure law and order. Or maybe you guard something, or chase criminals. No, he said. I'm an expert in people, in human behavior. It was pointless asking him about his work.
If someone insists on saying that he works for the Secret Service, he has no business working there.
Did you tell your wife before you got married that you were an agent for the KGB?
She didn't know for a long time. I told her later, of course. She needed to know who she was marrying, after all.
While Putin was stationed in faraway Dresden for 5 years, the political landscape in Moscow was changing. New people were coming to the fore in the aging Politburo. It was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire.
We didn't really sense what was going on. But then it would be difficult because it was a very closed society. Even for us members of the security apparatus, it was hard to imagine what was going on in the corridors of power. So along came Gorbachev, and there were changes. Perestroika.
Not only in Moscow were things changing. In East Germany, the new man, Mikhail Gorbachev, was announcing the new course to the Soviet allies.
I believe the only people in danger were those that didn't react to life. Those who had to take up these impulses from society and shape their policies accordingly shouldn't be afraid of difficulties. That's perfectly normal.
Gorbachev's words meant the beginning of the end for communist East Germany. Dresden, a few weeks later. And it wasn't just here that demonstrators were taking to the streets. They stormed the Stasi headquarters and also surged up to the KGB's offices.
Our instructions were as follows: not to intervene and not to prevent the citizens of the GDR from solving their internal problems themselves. I went out to the people and asked them what they wanted. They wanted to look at the building from inside because they thought it belonged to the Stasi. No, I said, it belongs to the Soviet army. The next question was, how come I spoke such good German? The only thing I could say was that I was an interpreter.
Not many people in Moscow have aspirations like that. The dream job of becoming an agent has faded. The Soviet Union came to an end 2 decades ago. For most people, it's a period that has nothing to do with them, a fading black and white photograph. Putin's circumstances have also changed, but he can remember those days anytime he wants to. The fact that someone like him asserted himself through the troubles of the 90s and is still a major player leaves little room for self-doubt. Putin has arrived. He refuses to admit defeat. Moscow and the protests aren't Russia, after all. The elections are won in the rural regions. Putin knows he'll never be suitable for Facebook. The leaders of the United Russia Party have come together for a meeting. The party's mission can be described in 2 words: Vladimir Putin. Although he's their leader, he isn't a member, which is probably only possible in Russia. Today, the party leader is encouraging his team, referring to the recent successes. He also talks about what needs to be done. The situation's serious.
И сейчас, и потом. Максимального результата на этих выборах. Потому что если мы расквасим парламент...
The polls are down since the opposition gave the governing party the label of being a bunch of crooks and thieves. The summit meeting has just one purpose: to demonstrate that the party still exists. But the managers weren't expecting a power cut in their own house.
На поддержку пенсионной системы. Так что...
Там кто-то нажал на...
Надо президентскую песню. Караул устал.
He was Vladimir Putin's biggest supporter, Boris Yeltsin, the combative president with democratic ambitions. Yeltsin took Putin under his wing in the Kremlin after the unemployed local politician Vladimir Putin got an office job there in 1996. August 1991. Some of the apparatchiks of the Soviet Communist Party felt Gorbachev's opening up was going a bit too far. They staged a coup and were supported by the KGB. It was the great moment of Boris Yeltsin. He supported Gorbachev. The coup failed. And for the first time, Putin suffered qualms of doubt about his own role.
Это интересный очень момент. Это было...
Yes, that was a very tense moment. It was during the coup that I became aware of my dual role. On the one hand, I was a close aide of a leading personality in the democratic opposition. At the same time, I had never left the KGB, and this organization had actively supported the coup. The dual role in which I found myself was simply untenable. So I asked to be relieved of my post, without knowing what would happen.
For many, the upheaval in Russia, perestroika, was a disaster. State structures were no longer functioning. Many found it difficult just to stay alive. That was the reason why Putin looked for another job as soon as he returned from East Germany.
Everyone could see that the Soviet Union was on the point of collapse. The seams were about to come apart. There was no longer any certainty that the security services would continue to exist. There was talk of cuts, and of course I thought about my future. I remember exactly how it was. I had 2 children to feed. I thought, right, I have a training in a civilian profession. I had studied law.
Putin obtained a leave of absence from the KGB and went to work at the university. Then he got an offer from his former law professor Anatoly Sobchak, who had since become mayor of St. Petersburg. He was also a supporter of perestroika and a friend of Yeltsin's.
He suggested I join him. I listened to his proposal and said, I'd like to work for you, but it probably won't be possible. I'm not just assistant to the rector of the university, I'm also an officer of the Foreign Intelligence Branch of the KGB.
Even so, Putin quickly made a new career for himself. He was soon deputy mayor of St. Petersburg.
That was the most difficult time in St. Petersburg. At the end of 1991, neither the Soviet Union nor Russia existed, let alone any power structures. Crime was rife, not least in the economy. Putin certainly used his experience as an agent and worked very energetically with entrepreneurs and managers. He had excellent information, and I think he had the situation under control. Sobchak trusted him, but in St. Petersburg, they were afraid of him.
We must react appropriately. If criminals attack us, the police must not hold back. They must be brutal. That's the only way to fight criminals. For every dead policeman, we must shoot 10 criminals. Within the law, of course.
We wanted to go to sleep, and I saw he had a rifle beside him. I asked what that was all about. He said, even if it doesn't really help in an emergency, I feel safer. He expected that because of his activities he might be attacked any time, or that criminals might simply kill him. He reacted pragmatically. That's why he obtained this pump gun.
In 1996, his mentor Sobchak lost the elections in St. Petersburg, and Putin was out of a job again. This time, he looked for one in the capital, Moscow.
On the 1st of August 1996, I started working in the president's office when Yeltsin won the election. I knew that Putin was looking for a job, and I suggested we should both look into the possibility of his working in the president's office.
Thanks to his efficiency, Putin quickly rose through the inner circle of power. Yeltsin's administration was shambolic. Putin soon became the head of the Federal Security Service, the secret service he'd quit years earlier in St. Petersburg.
There weren't many people in power at the time who were stubborn and who could be tough. The situation was difficult, and that's why Putin was very much in demand. After he became the director of the Federal Security Service, his influence went up enormously. When Putin was made the head of the Federal Security Service, he called me and offered me a job with him.
These were the final years of the Yeltsin era.
In this meeting, it's important to make plans.
Government by arbitrary appointment and alcohol level.
You're not sitting correctly. Step machine is the first deputy. Correct that. change seats. Sergei Vadimovich Stepashin is the first deputy.
A short while later, Stepashin became prime minister. 89 days later, Vladimir Putin replaced him.
My appointment as prime minister was pretty strange. Yeltsin invited me in and said, "You're appointed." I just asked, "Why?" He replied, "What has to be, has to be." Later, when I'd been in office 3 months, I realized what pressures I was under. Good afternoon. I shan't sit down because I won't be occupying this chair for very long. This morning I spoke to the President. He signed my dismissal notice. He thanked me for my work and fired me. My functions will be taken over by Vladimir Putin, the Secretary of the Security Council and head of the FSB.
Even before the job was offered to me, President Yeltsin summoned me to the Kremlin. He told me that he considered me a potential prime minister and that later he would propose me for the post of Russian president. That all came rather unexpectedly, and I said I wasn't sure I was intended for this job or this destiny. He didn't try to persuade me, but just said, "We'll come back to that. Think it over." Later he did come back to it, and I agreed.
In 1999, Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin as his successor. Putin showed his gratitude. As his first decree, the new president issued a guarantee that prevented Yeltsin and his confidants from being persecuted in any way. The price for power?
Ask Putin yourself. It's normal.
Ever since then, Putin has been traveling the huge country of Russia tirelessly. He flies through the 9 time zones to personally make sure everything is as it should be, if necessary. It's a hopeless task for one person in such a large country. He likes to stick to his own rule of not letting on if a situation is difficult. When Putin sits in front of wallpaper, he could take on the color of the paper in order to signal normalcy. He has to govern for the benefit of the country. One man, one mission. Putin only deals with all the other things when it becomes really necessary. There's no sense of crisis, and he doesn't talk about one either.
If you're friends with him and you're cooperative, if you're reliable, then he'll never disappoint you. That's a very important quality in life. And in politics, it's doubly important, especially so for a man, not being a traitor or coward and not to abandon those on your side.
What are his negative sides?
I'd tell you if he were retired. It's hard to change his mind. He wouldn't ever forgive someone who betrayed him, lied to him, or insulted him. He doesn't forget something like that.
It was the struggles of the 90s that shaped Putin, when the state went bankrupt and a few super-rich plundered the country in a Wild West fashion.
The situation was very difficult at the time, and the oligarchs you talked about had the absolute say. But that wasn't everything. The state was so weak, and so were its institutions. When I came to Moscow, that became even clearer. That triggered resistance in me. I just wanted to create order.
Hardly in office, Putin invited the oligarchs to the Kremlin. The message was clear. They were to keep out of politics in the future.
Yes, we made demands. I demanded that everyone follow the law. I said that this ruthless exploitation of Russia had to stop. Everyone got the message.
Mikhail Khodorkovsky had his own plans. The billionaire had become one of the richest men in Russia in just a few years through dodgy deals and the best government connections. He declared war on the new president and gave financial support to the opposition. He banked on the West. He wanted to sell his oil company, Yukos, the #2 in the country, to an American oil company. He accused the Kremlin of corruption. Putin responded by accusing him of tax evasion. It was a battle about who had the power.
On the next sheet, you can see that corruption costs Russia $30 billion a year. That's 10 to 12% of the country's gross domestic product.
Let's not forget about taxes or about tax evaders. You and I have already discussed this problem. Maybe that's why there are so many applications for the position of tax auditor.
Months later, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was arrested for tax evasion and sentenced to 8 years in prison. His lawyers went all the way to the European Court of Justice.
You read the verdict. There's an item in the ruling of the European Court where it says in black and white, the European Court of Justice wasn't able to detect any political motivation in the Khodorkovsky case.
Khodorkovsky had a second trial in December 2010. 10 days before the verdict was announced, you more or less said, very unusually for a politician, that Khodorkovsky was guilty, regardless of what the outcome would be.
I meant that there was already a verdict from the previous trial, and it was final. What did I say anyway? A thief belongs in jail. Do you disagree with that?
Ever since then, the economy has been a presidential concern, as has the occasional bankruptcy, like the Proletarsky company that makes ship propellers and now can't keep afloat anymore. The employees and the managers are waiting for Vladimir Putin and for help. He helped the cement factory in the neighborhood, whose owners simply closed down the company from one day to the next because profits weren't high enough for him. Then Putin came along.
When I said I was coming, they were all jumping around like cockroaches. They took all of these people hostage with their ambition, their incompetence, and their pure greed. This is about thousands of people's lives. It's completely unacceptable. Even if the owners can't agree, this factory will be opened again. Either way, we'll do it without them. Has everyone signed the agreement? Deripaska, have you signed? I can't see your signature. Come here and sign the agreement. Give me back my pen.
Putin's world, as a matter of having the will and the ideas, has reached its limits. He's become aware of that over the past few weeks. Now he wants to become president and find a successor in the next 6 years. Someone, he says, who can represent Russia's national interest, like Vladimir Putin. But he won't make the rules on his own anymore. His opponents won't tread softly anymore. The climate has changed. The fact that he and his team, the Tigers, suffer a serious defeat against the Bears is, in view of coming battles, merely the occasion for a sarcastic comment.
Gentlemen, in light of the victory of the Bears, I invite you to a beer. The tournament is over after all.
Да.